So it is good to say hello to everyone. And Bill, great to hear from you. I logged in about midway through your presentation, and uh, every time it amazes me how you choose a particular subject matter that seems to complement what I chose. And I chose this, I think I prepared this one 3 weeks ago. Um, So I found it very interesting, the discussion of fear and self-protection and as that relates to Taoist principles. Um, what I chose to discuss this week was a very closely related topic, which is anger, and which usually, of course, stems from fear in some incarnation. Uh, I have a similar background in that to Bill, in that my modus operandi for my method of operation for dealing with life and its adversities used to be very confrontational, and sometimes still is. I have to say that I've made enormous changes in my perspective and approach to life, but through learning from the teachers that I've had and implementing those practices on a daily basis in life, I've been able to adjust considerably both my perspective and my actions when it comes to both of those issues, fear being the core, and then the anger being the manifestation on a behavioral level. So, releasing the anger. How do we do that? Because this is a vexing issue. I'm sure that anyone who experiences these emotions can relate to this. When it gets in us and the emotion takes over, that's what I tell our kids is where the rubber meets the road. It is not easy. We may understand intellectually how to adjust. We may understand um, cognitively how we should approach a situation, but when the fire comes up, being able to take the breath, disengage from the emotion, observe the emotion, acknowledge it without trying to suppress it, yet at the same time react in an efficient manner that will allow a positive outcome to emerge, is quite a quandary. Now, as in thinking about this, there are any number of approaches to dealing with this issue because it's not something that is certainly new to human experience. We all have this in common, and there are many traditions and many perspectives when it comes to being able to approach the issue of releasing anger and its angry brother, resentment. This is something I found in psychology today, which have to do with 10 steps of letting go resentment. Now, of course, resentment is the smoldering anger that stays inside of us, and to me is much more damaging than the flashpoint anger that we typically experience when someone calls us a name or does something that's abruptly rude to us. This is something that stays with us, where we create fantasies and go through scenarios in our minds of how we can get back or what we could do better or what would ultimately make us feel better about a particular situation because we feel somehow that we've been wronged. So I'm just going to go down this list because there are many that I'm sure, will readily identify as steps that we may have taken in the past. So one, approach resentment as the addictive state of mind that it is. That's an important component because we feed off of these states of mind. Uh, think about it. Many times it's great to get ramped up because we have this serotonin and dopamine release related to this active state of mind. So we do actually have it does have an addictive quality to it. We want to realize that you are using resentment to replace old dramas, and acknowledge that you cannot change the past. So we accept the past as it is. Examine how your resentment may come from mentally confusing people in your present life with people from your past. So this has to do with recurring patterns, one might say karma, where we have a replacement that occurs so that our button gets pushed, something happens to us, and we respond to the stimulus that is immediately in front of us. But have you guys ever had this experience? I'm sure you have, where all of a sudden that response, that reaction that we have to someone who has said something to us is far beyond what would be considered reasonable for that specific instance. Well, that means that we're loaded up. We have a past experience which triggers that response. And when we can acknowledge that those responses and reactions can come from our past, that can help to diffuse part of that emotional outpouring of resentment and hostility. Acknowledge that you cannot control those who have rejected you. This is one that I've had difficulty with, because inherently I try to do my best in all areas of my life, and when I fall short and people are upset with me for whatever reason that may be, I feel rejected. I have no control over the fact that that other person may have rejected me, yet at the same time it builds a very intense reaction in me where I want to defend myself, and it makes me angry. Recognize that your resentment gives you only illusions of strength. Instead, highlight and validate your real strength and power. So what does that mean? Well, the illusions of strength, it's like the young guy puffing his chest out or whistling in the dark, showing that I'm not afraid. It is truly an illusion of strength. The rage, the hostility, in no way truly connotes the real strength. The inner strength is the peacefulness and the ability to respond in a metered, relaxed manner that can then move toward a peaceful resolution of whatever the situation might be. In my opinion, and from those who I've learned from, seem to espouse the same views. So 6 is learn to identify signals that provoke resentment. Apply the acronym HALT, which is widely used in 12-step programs: hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. Sure, everyone can relate to this too. When you're hungry, easy to snap at people. If we're angry, clearly we don't respond too well. When we're lonely and when we're tired. So I know when we're cranky, we tend to not respond that well. So we have to recognize that when we're in one of those mind states, our responses are going to probably be excessive. 7, practice cognitive behavioral techniques to stop indulging in resentment. Put a thought between your feelings of resentment and indulging the ruminating about them. I know it says put a through in there or a though in there, but the idea is that when we give ourselves permission to roll around in hostility, it begets more hostility. I found in my experience that if I allow myself to live in a fantasy about resentment, anger, getting back at someone, it does nothing to diffuse the situation. It only makes it worse. It just continues to promote and propagate the same type of behavior that's doing no good to anyone, but most importantly me, because all it is ruminating in my mind and destroying my peaceful mind state. 8, acknowledge your part in allowing the abuse to occur. Forgive yourself for that and make a decision not to let it occur again. So that means that we have a part in everything. I'm going to talk about that in one of the next slides. 9, declare an amnesty with the person you resent and with yourself. So that means we're going to release it. I release the resentment, I release you, and I release myself. And then forgive when you can, and practice willful and deliberate forgetfulness when you cannot, keeping in mind that these acts are gifts to yourself rather than capitulation to the people that you resent. And again, I find this very interesting, and I'll show you why in just another slide. So what do we do? How do we find out how to respond and act? Well, I study the Tao, and I study a variety of other religious traditions. I shouldn't say other religious traditions. I study religious traditions to begin to recognize the commonalities. One of the traditions I study is Christianity. And there's a gentleman, there's a church that's close to us named Real Life Church, and the pastor, whose name is Rusty George, is a wonderful gentleman who belongs to our facility. And he has invited me to come over to his church and listen to the services and his messages. And I was at one of those services when he discussed this very subject matter. And he brought up exactly these issues and letters from Paul to the Ephesians out of the New Testament. And these are the quotes. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling, and slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other. So what this actually means, and this is from a slide presentation that he had put together, that forgiving, whoa, there's my dog, he's forgiving, she's forgiving. Forgiving is the equivalent of pardon. And in the original language, in the Greek in which it was written. So forgiving means to pardon, which means an acknowledgement of the wrong that was done and a consequence, but a conscious release on the behalf of the pardoning party. So if you take a look at that and you begin to really think about it, this is exactly the same thing that was said in that last slide, which are the recommendations by Psychology Today. So there are correlations here that we can clearly see. These come out of Christian scripture. I'm sure we can, and I'm going to show you something out of Tibetan Buddhism in a moment. But again, the correlations between these, truth is truth, no matter which way you look at it, no matter where it comes from. We want to emulate the great teachers. Chagdud Tulku, who was my teacher's teacher, Lama Chodak Gyatso. What we need, I'm just going to read this verbatim. What we need is prevention, to look carefully at how and when our anger arises and learn to develop a longer fuse. We know that it is possible because when we think about an angry episode a week later, our perspective has already changed and we can see how we could have acted more appropriately. Prevention requires being very methodical at first. Sit in a room and imagine different scenarios in which you lose your temper. Then when you find yourself in actual situations that make you angry, your anger won't last as long. As you become aware of how you respond to negative situations, you will learn to pull back from confrontation. Instead of exploding, saying and doing things that you will regret for years, you will be able to pause before you react. You will say, aha, there it is. This is my anger. This is what I've been working with all this time in the privacy of my bedroom. In that short interval, you can choose to respond differently. This Tibetan spiritual teacher observes, in Tibetan Buddhism, the peacock symbolizes the bodhisattva. A peacock is said to eat poisonous plants, transforming their toxins into the radiant colors of its feathers. It does not poison itself. In the same way, we who advocate peace must not poison ourselves with anger, but regard with equanimity those who perpetrate violence, remaining constantly aware of our own state of mind. If we become angry in our efforts, we must pull back and regain our compassionate perspective. Without anger, perhaps we will penetrate the terrible delusion that gives rise to violence and hellish suffering. The way of peace is not an easy one, and this teaching makes it clear how we must always guard our mind against the poisons of anger and its brothers and sisters, ignorance, desire, jealousy, and pride. According to Tao Talks, good heart is the medicine that heals all conflict and is the antidote to selfishness. So how can we achieve this mind state? Practice. That's been my experience. As some of you guys know that I've mentioned before, I've had plenty of physical confrontations, and most of them because I was looking for them, and I was in a mind state that drew it toward me. And I can tell you from experience that not engaging in that process is far superior to the process of engaging in that practice. In physical confrontation, certainly, but the psychological duress that accompanies that mind state, boy, I have really worked hard and continue to work hard to abate those sensations and still acknowledge them because I'm going to have them, but react in a way that's positive. My wife and I were at a Verizon store last week, and it was just one of those days where we went there, we thought we were going to be able to flip phones over in 15 minutes, and it took us 2 hours with the guy fuddling around with the phone and trying to push all the buttons and get it to do whatever it was supposed to do. So as we sat there for the 2 hours, we just enjoyed one another's company, and he was so taken back by the fact that we were able to just be there as he tried to get the phone to work and not snap at him and bite his head off for not making the process go any faster. That was one where I was very happy that I didn't, that I was able to take a step back and recognize that there was nothing that this young man could do about this. It was just the circumstances, and just allow it to be. I had to go teach a meditation class actually right at that time period. So I just called and made alternative plans for someone else to lead the meditation, or not, as the case may have been. But it worked out perfectly. And then there are other times when something gets under my skin and I just don't react as in an efficient a manner as I wish that I could. So progress, not perfection. I'm certainly not the sage, I'm not the Buddha, so I'm going to keep on working on it. But in the meantime, it's part of the journey of life, and on I go, but I've made some progress. So I hope that was useful to some of you guys, and I hope you have a great week.
Yeah, thank you so much. I want to point out a similarity that I noticed. I'm not talking about similarity in themes, and you are correct. Many of the things that you are talking about today echo what Bill has expressed in that way of synchronicities that we have often talked about, which I think is great. What I want to bring in is an observation of myself, of you, and also of Bill. So both of you have been studying, the Tao for many, many years, and both of you have gotten to the point where you are able to face a potentially stressful situation with a state of equilibrium. Now, it's actually a little bit more than that. One thing that I noticed about the two of you is that you're also able to inject a sense of humor into the situation, which, if you think about it, that is how the great spiritual masters react to the challenges of life. They're able to remain calm, and they're able to see the humor in it. So that's a great example for us, for all of us to follow. And I see that the people that are online also agree with you and Bill. So for instance, David has said, thank you for today, Bill. Our enemies are our best teachers. In my meager daily practice, I've noticed how many strangers, first encounters are smiles, which is, wonderful. Also from Tim, great message, Bill. Great message, Ed, and a great one-two punch with Bill's presentation. Absolutely agree with that. From Larry, excellent presentation. The flip side of letting go of thesis is empathy by recognizing the propensity within others to fall into the traps listed in the Psychology Today prescription. Thus, knowing we're subject to the pitfalls described suggests that we should expect others to likewise be vulnerable. This recognition is an element of compassion. Larry, that's extremely well said. And from Todd, great topic, both Ed and Bill.